When my sister asked me to build her a bookcase, I faced a bit of a dilemma. It's central London, I don't have a workshop, I have very limited tools, and building something like this was not going to be straightforward if I used conventional means. The normal way you would start is with putting some verticals in with some sort of shelf supports or brackets, and then you would add the shelves as you go along. I decided to completely turn the option the other way up, and I built it like a wall. I put horizontal beams in and then put dividers to separate the sections, and in that way I was able to get the wood all pre-cut, and I just had a relatively simple assembly job which I'm now going to show you. I've had the MDF shelves cut so that they will fit exactly on the skirting board. This is just one of the uprights, but I'm just using it to demonstrate how the long shelf will go. Now that means I've got to have some supports where I'm going to have my uprights. So what I'm doing is marking out the floor, the carpet, cutting it out where I'm going to put a support in, and then I've dropped in, that's one I've already done, and dropped in the MDF upright. That looks pretty good. So now, very carefully, using the sharp knife, I'm going to start cutting the carpet. The first couple of cuts, you barely touch the surface. You need the knife to get a purchase. The Stanley knife and just cut that bit there. There we go. Underlay. So, right. Next, I've dropped the wood into the slot, and with the spirit level on the edge of the skirting, making sure it's absolutely horizontal, I draw a cut line. Here we go. Wow, tight fit. So the paint's dry, and I've put my 3 supports in place, and I'm now going to test fit the first shelf, which I've had cut to size, so hopefully that will go nicely. Excellent. Absolutely smack on. Could do is coming up a tiny little bit. What I'm going to do, I've got a bag of shims here, all different thicknesses. The very thinnest is the green, so I'm just going to try putting one green under each. That's better. Bear in mind there's going to be quite a lot of weight as we add the shelves vertically like this. weight is going to build up, so it needs to be absolutely dead flat before we start. Yep, I'm happy with that. I think I'll give it a coat of paint. On second thoughts, I've decided to put one screw in because you don't want this flipping bit backs and forwards when everything's in place. I've drilled a hole, note the bit of tape around to measure the depth so I don't go too deep. And now I'm ready to put the screw in. That's it. Stop that. Any movement there. It's much easier to paint the shelf at this stage. I'm just going to give it at least an undercoat, because once all the uprights are in place it'll be much harder. This is doing pretty good. This is Leyland Smart and it seems to be very appropriate for the MDF. MDF can be a real sod to paint, but this is working really well. I'm not so keen on their emulsion, it's very weak and runny. I've not filled that hole because we're going to have a vertical there. I'm ready to start building the shelves, but I did a little dummy run and I've come across a problem. This wall is very slightly leaning outwards, typical of a English property. It's definitely not straight. So what I'm worried about is when I put the dividers in, they want to be absolutely flush with the front. But if the wall's coming out, then gradually these are going to come out. So I've either got to shave some material off the back, or I've taken an easier option. I've taken these screws out, brought the shelf forward, I put spacers in at either end so that it's easier to fill a gap. That's no problem. So I'm ready to start building. That's my end piece unpainted on that side. I'm going to put a little dab of glue along the bottom. Doesn't need a lot, the weight is going to hold it all. Drop here. And see how we go with that. Number one board in position. Now, I want to line it up exactly with the end of the base shelf. I'm not too worried about the gap, I can fill that. The important thing is one, that I've got the shelf square, and two, that it's upright. Now the next one, here. Blob on the back as well. Once again. Tiny bit in. That's good. I've got my first layer of uprights in, so now I'm going to very carefully put the shelf in place, and that'll help hold it all together. Notice that's got a bit of damage. Pretty happy with that. I've got pretty, actually this one's a bit loose. Change of plan. I wasn't going to glue this, but I think on second thoughts I'm going to tip that up and glue. Again. That's good. Very crucial to get this bottom layer absolutely right, because as you go up, it'll only get worse if you've got a problem here. I'm pretty happy with that. So to shelf number 3. It'd be a lot easier with 2 people, but I'm on my own. It's actually going together pretty well, I'm quite pleased. I think I'm going to take a rest shortly and let this dry off and put some weight on. To hold it down. 3 more to go. Just as I suspected, despite having left quite a good gap at the back here to allow for the wall sloping, as we come up, now in a situation where with this upright hard against the wall, it's jutting out at the front here, so I'm going to have to shave some material off the back of the wood. Don't know if I could have done any different really. And yet the end one is flush at the front and there's a gap at the back, so obviously as the wall moves along it's bowing out this way. Builders. And so another layer goes on. Once again, this big heavy shelf. The top one's going to be fun. bought this LED strip light to go along the top shelf, just under the front of the top shelf, to give some nice light effect down the front of the bookshelves. So the problem is, this is 3 meters long and I only actually need about 2.4 meters. So you can only cut 1 meter off at a time, so I can't do that. The plan I've had to come up with is I've drilled a hole in the shelf and I'm going to have to feed the strip light through the hole and leave some of it will be hidden away above in the dark, so I'll just have to make sure it's nice and light proof. Starting at the opposite end, I've got to allow for the upright that gets in the way there, and I've screwed these plastic strips into place. So I'm going to start the strip light and work it along from there. Back at the end, so unfortunately that bit of light there is surplus to requirements, and that will just have to sit up above the shelf and nothing else I could do. Just to show you the supply wire, which I brought up from down below, it's hidden behind here, but I've allowed for a switch point there. I'm going to wire in this switches shortly, and then at the top I've taped it to the ceiling so it doesn't get in the way while I install the top shelf. So here comes the tricky bit, putting the last top shelf into place. Let's start there. Oops. Go. Well, I've wired everything up and took the excess light away, and now we'll just switch on. Hey, we have light. Looks a bit messy at the moment, but I'm about to put this trim up above that, and that will make it look a lot better. So I've drilled and countersunk the fixing holes. I'm ready to put this up in place. I've painted the back to give a reflection to spread the light a bit better. So up we go. Oops. Into position. I'm happy with that. I'm keen to get a nice good joint here between the wall and the MDF. I don't want it shrinking, so I'm going to use this wood filler and see how we get along. I'm also going to help smooth over the edge of the MDF. So this stuff goes off pretty quickly, so you don't want to mix too much at one go. But you need to use enough hardener that it sets properly, otherwise it tends to stay very sticky. It needs a really good mix. I'm going to push that in the gap. Bear in mind you can sand it down afterwards, so you haven't got to get it too particularly good. hoping it's going to hide most of these joints as well, so that it looks like all one piece of wood. This is pretty much optional, but I like to fill all the gaps with a decorator's caulk. Okay, they're going to be hidden by books and stuff, but it just looks nicer when the shelves are empty. You want to make sure that you buy paintable. Push it into the cracks really well, and then just use a damp cloth to wipe off any excess and leave a nice smooth edge. I completed this bookcase about 3 years ago, and I think it's worth adding a postscript. Firstly, had I anticipated the sheer weight of books involved, I would have built the base differently, probably putting an MDF strip along the entire length of the floor and using more uprights to support the bottom shelf, then hiding them with a piece of skirting. The other thing I should mention is the shelf thickness. You can buy 18mm MDF and get it cut pretty much anywhere, so if your shelf requirement is lighter duty, then save money and go for that. You might just want to space the uprights slightly closer together. The 30mm MDF I used was hard to source and even harder because I needed it cutting down from 8 by 4 sheets. Do research on that before you go into too much planning. Finally, you may have seen in the background a wardrobe under construction. This was a really interesting project, and I will be making a video on that shortly. Thanks for watching.